Hey everyone! Today's tutorial is about a topic that doesn't seem to be discussed much in the YouTube Godot game dev space. The topic is creating custom fonts for your game. Creating a font is difficult. Not only do different languages have different unique characters, but the font can also be difficult to read if you don't use proper kerning and good typeface. So if you can use a pre-existing font, better use it. But if you want to make your own font for your game, you have two options: Bitmap Fonts and Dynamic Fonts. The difference between those two: dynamic fonts use TTF files, the common and well-established way to define fonts for many different programs. TTFs save the font as glyphs, meaning the shape of the character is defined mathematically. This allows to use a single TTF to render fonts at various different sizes, without losing detail on lower resolutions or getting blocky characters on higher resolutions. But making your own TTF or OTF file is not that easy. There are some websites and applications for that, but the ones I found are rather limited in the free versions. Luckily, if you just need the font for your game, we have a different option: Bitmap Fonts. You can think of Bitmap Fonts as rendering sprites for each character/letter. So unlike the glyph-based approach, we don't have a mathematical definition of a character. Instead, we have a pixel-based representation. Meaning bitmap fonts aren't that good for scaling, especially if your font doesn't have a pixel art look. The big advantage is, technically all we need is an image file with all characters we want to use. Well, we also need information on kerning, but not necessarily as a file. If you don't know what kerning is, it's the space between two characters. If the space between all characters is the same, the font is considered a monospace font. But more often than not, the space between certain characters has a custom value. Imagine an uppercase T and a lowercase I. These characters can be right next to each other, unlike uppercase O and lowercase I. Of course, the exact values depend on the art style. So we need an image file and kerning information. The bitmap fonts of Godot support the FNT file format. It's basically just a text file format containing information on the image file and the kerning. Again, there are some applications out there to support that file format. But let's do all that ourselves, shall we? Godot allows us to do everything the FNT file does in GDScript. So how does it work? There is a class in GDScript called Bitmap Font. This class is the GDScript equivalent of the bitmap font file read-load. There even is a create from FNT file function here, in case we want to use the data of an FNT file and load it into a bitmap font object. But the class has more functions than that. There's also add texture. We just need to pass an image file with various characters to use. Notice we can add more than one texture. This can be especially helpful if you want to support multiple languages or convert certain characters to symbols. Think button prompts for different controller types. Then we can specify the height and ascent of our font if you so desire. I just use the height in pixel for this example. Afterwards, we need to manually add all characters the bitmap font should recognize. This is a lot to write, so a better approach is to use a loop. Just iterate through all characters you want to add and call add char for each. Now that might be easier said than done. Add char expects you to pass the Unicode value of the character instead of a single character string. It does make sense to do this, but how do we get the Unicode value? Well, with the ORT function. In order to assign a character to a part of the texture, we need to convert the Unicode value I into the proper offset inside our image texture. In my case, it's an offset of 32. I start with the empty space character, which has the Unicode value 32. So C equals I minus 32. If the resulting value is outside the range of characters in the image file, we just use the empty space character instead. So Unicode values below 32 and above 132 will be mapped to C equals 0 if necessary. The variable C can then be used to define the rectangle inside the image file containing the needed character. The last two arguments of add_char are the alignment and the advance. While alignment will be a zero vector in most cases, the advance is the default distance to the next letter. In this case, 6 pixels. Just take whatever value seems best here and change the value for different characters if needed. Of course, you can also map special characters, like I did here for German letters. I don't have them in my font currently, so I just map them to the question mark character in my image file. That way, in a German text, these special characters would be displayed as a question mark instead. When testing, you'll probably see that the distance between certain letters just doesn't fit with the default advance of add_char. So we add kerning pairs to the bitmap font, which override the default advance. In this example, the distance between the first letter T to the second letter A is 6 minus 3 pixels instead of 6. The argument 3 is not the absolute distance between T and A. Instead, it's the value by which to reduce the default distance. If you were to put a negative value here, the distance would increase instead. Note that this doesn't work the other way around. The distance from A to T still is 6 pixels. Finally, we need to somehow add the font to be used in a control node, for example the label. The easiest way to do this is to add the bitmap font as a default font to a theme and the theme to the node. Now this is a very easy script. You could run it at the start of the game once and be done with it. But we can go one step further. Create an actual bitmap font resource. The only difference is to save our bitmap font in the script as a resource with resourcesaver.save. We need to pass the path to the file we want to save the font in and of course the font itself. Check if this worked, and if it did, we can, again, assign the font to a theme. Notice how I load the saved font file instead of the bitmap font file used in the script. Godot still does differentiate between those two versions. I hope you found this topic as interesting as I did. Feel free to write a comment and tell me. Thanks for watching, and until next time, bye bye.